I'm Chief Jim Vambaretto of the Gates Police. I'm also the president of the Monroe County Chiefs Association, and we're going to have our press conference here this morning to talk about the terrible murder that occurred here on April 7th. As you can see, there's a lot of people here because we are in the midst of a huge pandemic of violence occurring. Primarily, it started in our urban area in the city of Rochester, which we all are connected to the city of Rochester. The city of Rochester is what puts us on the map. If the city fails, we all fail, our communities. And right now, that spike in violence is starting to drift out into the suburbs. It is an issue that there have been many press conferences actually in the last week. I think you saw the superintendent of schools came out with I thought was a very powerful message, talking about how many kids have been affected by the violence. I can tell you that, this is not going to be solved by the police. It's not going to be solved by the courts. It's not going to be solved by the school district because this is a people problem, right? This is a people problem. We are the only ones, us, our families, our loved ones, we have got to take back what's going on right now and instill in our loved ones respect and put down the guns and to stop that violence. That is the ultimate message that you're going to hear today from all these people. I can't do it, the mayor can't do it, superintendent of schools can't do it. It's got to come from that desire to not have our streets look like a war zone. And that's exactly what we have right now, is it looks like a war zone. And you know what? We can't blame some terrorist who came in here to do that. We can't blame people from Chicago who came up here. These are our own Rochesterians who are killing Rochesterians. This is our problem, we own it, and somehow we've got to come up with a solution for this. And we're going to talk this morning not only about the murder, but we're going to discuss what some of that violence looks like, and more importantly, what I believe are some of the solutions, specifically as it relates to law enforcement. So we're going to start off, there's going to be 3 parts to this press conference. You're going to get what I'm going to call the Cliff Notes of what the investigation is. I will not be telling you what the evidence is or anything that connects these 2 juveniles to the crime, but I will give you Cliff Notes of what the investigation looked like and some things that went on behind the scenes. After that, you are then going to hear from some local leaders. Some of our town supervisors are standing here with me, and some of our elected officials. You're going to hear some comments from them. And then we'll go back to, I'm going to put my hat on as the Chiefs Association president, and we're going to talk about how some of these reforms that were meant to help our community have had some unintended consequences that have not been positive in getting the bad guys off the street. And we're going to address what some of those are, from bail reform, parole reform, and some of those issues there. So that's where we're heading. I would like to just quick introduce this multi-agency task force that we assembled within 3 hours of the Gates murder. We put together this task force here. And I was very impressed, and I'm so pleased with the relationships that we have here in Monroe County with all of our agencies, the cooperation that takes place. It's second to none on how we operate here. You can be very proud of what law enforcement looks like here in Monroe County. And so some of those agencies that were involved immediately with us and we're really right into the trenches here. The New York State Police. If I announce your agency, right, you can just kind of raise your hand here. The New York State Police. I think Major Barry Chase is here today. They sent me about 6 to 8 BCI investigators who came up here to Rochester and immediately set up an office with us. Grease Police, I think Chief Forsyth is here today. Rondequoit Police, Chief Laird. Ogden Police, Chief Mears. Webster Police, I don't think they're here today. Rochester Police, we have Commander Correa stepping in for Chief Harriet. Monroe County Sheriff's Office, we have Chief Deputy Fowler, who's filling in for Sheriff Baxter. Livingston County Sheriff, we have Sheriff Doherty himself, drove up here. I appreciate that very much, Sheriff. He still has the best hairdo of all of us, though. I'm almost so envious. Genesee County Sheriffs were involved in this investigation. I don't think they're here. Our District Attorney's Office, very important piece, the U.S. Marshal's Fugitive Task Force. We have Marshal Charles Salina here with us today. The Monroe County Crime Analysis Center, they are the ones that track all of our crime trends for us and give us intel and data like that. And the Monroe County Crime Lab, those are the people all the evidence gets sent to, ballistics and stuff like that. They were very crucial to this. The 911 Center, They coordinated all the tips and leads that were coming in, and again, did a great job in the investigation. We also had the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office down in Florida, who was very instrumental, and you're going to hear about their role too. As some guests we do have here, we do have East Rochester Police Brandon Berg is here today to support us, and the Brockport Chief Kazupoli. I think that's everybody on the law enforcement side. So let's start with our victim, Richard Shasha, lifetime Monroe County resident, model citizen, compassionate, a friend to hundreds of people, was well established in our community, living out his retirement years with his wife and his family. And that all tragically came to an end on the streets of Gates on April 7th by two 16-year-old kids who we already know, Edgar Tolentino and Anthony Jacobs. These kids were born and raised here in Rochester. They are a product of our environment. I can tell you that as we spoke to some of these kids, I was extremely concerned with the hardcore attitude that they had, no moral compass, which leads us all to that question of how is it possible that a 16-year-old raised in our community can become what they have become. So let's start with the timeline. This is going to be lengthy, so get your pens ready. How this all starts with stolen cars. It starts down in February in Hillsbury County. At some point, Edgar goes down to visit his mother in Florida. He brings with him an 18-year-old female. February 28th, they have their first car stolen. It occurs in a parking lot of a Walmart where they set up somebody on Facebook, what's that thing called? Facebook Marketplace, where you sell your stuff, right? They contact somebody who's selling a car. They say, hey, let's meet in the Walmart parking lot, right? Isn't that something that we tell the public? If you're going to do these transactions, you go somewhere in a public place, right? Because hopefully you're going to reduce yourself being a victim of a crime, and if something does happen, if you're in a public place, hopefully there's going to be videotape or something like that. So, you know, the victim did everything right? They went to Walmart, they met with these two individuals, they engaged in conversation over the car. Victim agreed to let them test drive the car in the parking lot. And of course, what did they do? They got in the car and they took off. And that is our first documented theft of a car occurring down in Florida on the 28th. That would be a Toyota Camry. On March 4th, down in the same county down there, a Mercedes-Benz is similarly stolen. Again, they meet the victim in a Walmart parking lot. In fact, they give them the keys to hold for the stolen car. Here's our car. This is the collateral. You can hold on to our car keys while we test drive your car. And they take off with that Mercedes-Benz. I give a lot of credit to Hillsbury, Florida Police. They took these thefts very seriously, did a lot of legwork on it. And on March 8th, they developed probable cause to charge Edgar with grand theft auto in Florida. In the meantime, information is developed that appears he is on his way up the East Coast in that Mercedes-Benz. On March 15th, he ends up in Genesee County and the town of Batavia. And again, he sets up a customer on Facebook. They meet at the Walmart, and he's able to steal this black Infiniti from the victim in Batavia. This black Infiniti would become the subject of many descriptions of crimes that start to occur across Monroe County, Livingston County. That black Infiniti becomes kind of a target for law enforcement. And of course, he also left behind that Mercedes-Benz that he stole from Florida. He left that in Genesee County. At some point, Livingston County starts getting Facebook thefts where the suspects, and I don't know who they are, I'm not going to say who the suspects are, we haven't quite proved all this, but victims in Livingston County had them come to their house, they met them in their driveway, talked about the car, and ultimately they let him test drive the car, and off went the car. And Sheriff Doherty had about 2 of those that occurred in Livingston County. Beginning around March 28th through April 6th, Monroe County starts having cars that are stolen. Some of them are the Facebook MO, right, modus of operandi. Some of them start to become carjackings, what we call carjackings. Some of the techniques they would use, some of them they would just pull up to somebody and they tell them that their tire was low, and they start talking about their tire, get them out of the car. They might just jump in the car and steal the car. They started doing some bump and tap MVAs, which makes somebody pull over. And of course, they would jump in the car, steal the car. They then graduated to individuals were being threatened with a gun. And so things started to become a little more brazen. And then Ogden, the town to the west here, on April 1st actually had one where they threatened the gun, and they ultimately shot 1 round from that gun. And so total, I think we had about 4 of these carjackings that involved some sort of a firearm. Leads us now to April 7th. That would be the day of the Gates job. 9:45 a.m., we got a 911 call comes in from a female who requested Greece police. She was at a church over on North Greece Road, and some individuals approached her and started talking about her tire. She thought that was very suspicious. She did the right thing, called 911. Vehicle description was a black car with heavily tinted out windows. 10 a.m., another female is approached in a parking lot on Ridge Road. Same scenario, they talked to her about her tire to engage her in conversation. She also becomes very suspicious, and she drives away. She doesn't call us or tell us about this until she sees the news later that evening. 10:10 a.m., a call is received through 911 of a reckless driver on Long Pond Road at Ridge Road. This was a black car with tinted out windows. And then, of course, at 10:41 a.m. is the attempted carjacking over in Gates, and that is a black car with tinted windows. After the Gates job, I can say there have been no more of these carjackings occurring out in the suburbs. Obviously, the city of Rochester still has issues going on. So obviously, we believe there's more than one group out there doing the carjackings, but I can tell you there have not been any more in the actual suburbs since April 7th. So when that call came in, we immediately assembled this multi-agency task force. We had a meeting at the Gates Police Department just 3 hours after the murder at 2 o'clock, and within 3 hours we had 40 investigators sent to the Gates Police Department. Most agencies sent 1 and 2. RPD sent 5 of their major crimes guys and gals. New York State Police again, 6 to 8 BCI plus uniform help. And we got together, and our first order of business was to figure out how we can find this black car, right? That was going to be a crucial case for this investigation, was finding the black car with the tinted out windows. Upon breaking from that meeting, I am so proud of the Rochester Police Department, their major crimes guys. Within a couple more hours, by 4 or 5 o'clock, they found a black car with tinted out windows that we believed was going to be the suspect vehicle, parked on a side street on the west side of the city. The car was unoccupied. The surveillance was set up, and by around 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, a 17-year-old got in that car. We went to stop that car. The troopers and the Rochester Police Department did a phenomenal job. We engaged that car with a chase. It didn't last too long before he crashed. A little foot chase, and then a 17-year-old was taken into custody. I think most of you all have some sort of video from that. It was pretty much being broadcast live on Facebook and other media outlets. That 17-year-old was brought back to our office, and based on our investigation, it became clear that he was not specifically involved in the murder. Just because we have him driving the car 10 hours later doesn't mean he was involved in the murder. So he was not charged, but he was turned over to probation. There were some juvenile warrants for him, and he was turned over to the Children's Detention Center based on those warrants. I will tell you that finding that car was very significant in this investigation. There was evidence that was found inside that car that would help us with the murder investigation. There was evidence in that car that gave us some clues that perhaps that car was used in some other shots fired and shootings in the city there. On Friday, April 9th, 2 days after the homicide, we had an interest at that point in this Edgar Tolentino. He was taken into custody while driving on 390 southbound, crossing into Livingston County. Traffic stop was initiated. He was taken into custody, brought back to Gates, and was interviewed. We did not have any probable cause at that point to hold him or to charge him. However, he did have that outstanding warrant from Florida for grand theft auto, and so he was taken into custody on that warrant and secured at the Juvenile Detention Center. We at least had him off the streets. On Thursday, April 22nd, Tolentino was formally charged with the murder, brought back to Gates. He was arraigned by Judge Romeo. At that time, the investigation had made some significant progress, and we had grounds to charge him with that murder, and that took place on April 22nd. He was brought here, he was arraigned, he was sent back to the Children's Detention Center. At this time, we also began an exhaustive search for Anthony Jacobs. We now had enough evidence to charge him with his involvement in this murder. And it was at that point that, we decided as a task force that we would turn this over to the U.S. Marshals Task Force to go out and get him into custody. That is what they do every day. The Fugitive Task Force, they breathe, live, and talk about finding people. That is their job, and we immediately turned it over to them to go out there and try to find Anthony. We spent 6 days attempting to get the family to turn him over. Promises were made, but never kept. We backed the task force off when the family said they would bring him in at a certain time. We couldn't have been more honest with these people, true to our word, to that family, trying to get cooperation, and of course, that never happened. So, decision was made on Thursday, the 29th, that we would do a press statement, which we gave out to all of you, with his picture and the fact that he was wanted for murder, hoping that that would put some pressure on the family. We also beefed up our efforts with the Marshals Task Force to have an omnipresence down in certain houses that we were looking at. The pressure was on, and I would suggest to you that on Friday, when the mother came and turned him over, that was not something that she did out of the goodness of her heart. It was done because they were backed up into a corner, and she realized the best thing to do at this point for the good of their family was to turn him over to the police, okay? That was not a great gesture of kindness and showing compassion. That was done because of the task force, the Fugitive Task Force, and all the pressure that had been put on them to cough him up. All right, so that's all I have on the investigation that I'm going to give you at this point. I told you we're not going to get into any of the evidence. I think you have a very good picture of what went on leading up to the actual murder. So at this point, I'm just going to turn this over to some of our elected officials and our community people who are here who want to talk about the pandemic of violence that's going on across Monroe County. And I'm going to start with our town supervisor, Cosmo Junta.
Thank you, Chief. Hate these things. Good morning. I'd first like to start off by expressing my deepest condolences to the family and friends of Richie Shasha, with hopes that this will bring some closure to them. I'm here this morning not only as the Gatetown Supervisor, but also as Monroe County, the President of Monroe County Supervisors Association. And standing with me, as you can see, are several of my fellow town supervisors. And that would be John Moffett of Mendon. We have David Dunning, Child Life Supervisor, Gay Lenhart of Ogden, Linda Dobson of Wheatland, Jerry QC, I got it right, of Rush, and then Jack Barton of Parma. Thank you so much for coming and supporting. Also, to those that could not show today, did email me in their support. Also with us, standing up here, are my town's county legislators, Frank Alkoffer and Yaversha Roman. So thank you again for coming up here. All of us have big concerns with public safety in our respective communities. Our residents have turned to us and expressed their concerns as the violence is slowly transitioning out into our communities and suburbs here in Monroe County. Public safety has become one of the greatest challenges we are all now facing. How are we to assure our residents that any of our communities are safe? With record homicides being recorded in the city, multiple carjackings that have happened all over Monroe County, including this recent senseless murder of an innocent man here in my town, right here in Gates. Just last week, a young child was caught in a crossfire at a local market. The suspect had no disregard for his surroundings and fired off several shots. All of this continues to happen with the reverberation of defunding the police that can be heard all over across our country. Bail reform and catch and release has only further emboldened those who have chosen a life of crime. Our juvenile justice system is clearly broken, and the continued talking of defunding the police only serves to further the objectives of those who have chosen that misguided path. Imagine a day when you call 911 and no one responds. What then? I just want to say thank you to all the law enforcement agencies here who were involved with the arrest of the suspect in the murder of Mr. Shasha. My Gates PD, and especially Chief Van Brederode, who led this task force for their dedication and for his dedication, doing what he and his officers do to keep our community safe. And now, they need our support, even more so, to assure law and order prevails. Without the police, we will be left to fend for ourselves, and that's not going to go on well. Thank you.
I would like to just acknowledge Sheriff Baxter is here, is in the back of the room there, and thank you, Sheriff, for coming out here and showing support. We appreciate that, and thank you for all the work that your officers and deputies did on this case here. Next up is our county legislator, 4th District, represents the town of Gates, Frank Alkoffer.
Good morning. First, I want to start off to let everybody know that I am a lifelong resident of the town of Gates. 3rd generation, parents, grandparents, and myself. And what happens at Gates, I take it personally. I really do. So, but I have a few words that I wanted to mention here. Before I say my remarks, I must first acknowledge Gates Police Chief Jim Van Brederode and the officers of the Gates Police Department. I'm so proud of the men and women of this department for the outstanding work they did in bringing the teen suspects in the recent Gates carjacking into police custody. Also, I must acknowledge the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, the New York State Police, the United States Marshal's Office, as well as other police agencies who work collaboratively to apprehend these suspects. This morning, as we hold this press conference, we are all keenly aware of the increased violence on our streets and in our neighborhoods. Weekly, we hear and read about the various outlets of the shootings, attempted robberies, police chases, and drug sales in our neighborhoods and on our streets. It just seems to be increasing. It needs to stop. This is a personal note. All the while, Rochester and Albany elected officials are still talking about defunding police agencies across New York State. How can these police departments provide our residents with the much-needed coverage and protection on our streets and in our neighborhoods? By reducing police agency resources, they cannot provide adequate staffing levels for their departments or to our community. Another area of concern is bail reform, whereby an individual commits a crime, is apprehended and then released by the courts without even a trial to determine his innocence or guilt. How often we read that some individuals are caught, then released to commit another serious crime act the same day. These types of laws must change to protect all residents of our community. And another one that I'm really concerned about is the passing of the marijuana law here. Was approved by the State Assembly and the Senate. Each resident can legally possess up to 5 pounds of marijuana in his or her possession. Overuse of this drug can cause impairment for any function such as driving an automobile or performing one's job responsibilities. This is a real threat to our society and to our law enforcement community. Residents of Monroe County, all of us together, have an obligation to speak up on these issues. If we remain silent, no change will come to our neighborhood and our communities. Violence and crime will continue to increase. We need to change these ineffective laws that do not hold individuals accountable for their actions. We as legislators, Assembly, and State Senate officials do have a profound impact on our communities' health and safety. Any questions? I'll certainly be, we have another person, Aversia is here from the county ledge with me, but we do need to take a stand. I just see so much violence, and as the chief mentioned, it is increasing in our communities all throughout Monroe County. We need to end this now, Enough injury, enough hurt, enough lives were taken. So, thank you, Chief.
Next up is the founder of the United and Healing Through Hope of Monroe County, Clay Harris is here. Law enforcement in Monroe County has been working with Clay and his group, come up with strategies and also uniting our neighborhoods. And with him today is, most of you know, Van White is a lifetime public servant here in Rochester, and he's been around the block a few times, and Clay is going to come up here and address you.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to let you know that I'm really not excited, enthusiastic to be here because this is a somber time, not just today, but in general in our community, where we're having our children throwing away their lives, and we have to do something about it. So United and Healing Through Hope of Monroe County has been planting this seed and tilling the soil for going on a year now. You have a lot of folk in this room who has been working with us and on our in our organization, including Sheriff Baxter, many of the chiefs, many of the folk in the judicial system, President Van White of the Rochester City School District, many town supervisors, many churches. We have probably about 40 churches involved, community organizations, and the chorus of what you're hearing and the solutions that we need is about the community coming together to address this very significant systemic problem that we've had for decades. And we have press conference after press conference after press conference, and nothing really changes until we systematically come up with solutions and come together as a community. It's going to get worse. So we're going to have our own press conference, United and Healing Through Hope of Monroe County, on Thursday at 3:30 at 60 Lorimer Street, Ark of the Covenant Church. Many of you have already been there, not just the media, but people standing behind us and around us. And we're going to be laying out a plan that we're going to systematically address this systemic problem with a multi-pronged approach, comprehensively, to finally address it, mitigate it, and hopefully eliminate it. It's too sad that not only we're losing our young people, but we're losing people in general in Monroe County. We can't stand for it anymore. It's not acceptable. Together we can when we take a stand. And I think we are beginning to do that, but now we have to come together totally in Monroe County and even in this region, because we are a family. We're together. We cannot be separated. We can't have silos. We have to address this together. It has to start at home, but it also has to start in the church, because this is a moral and a value issue that we've gotten away from, not just as a community, but even as a nation, to be quite frank with you. None of us are perfect. We all are fallible. We all make mistakes. But the mistake we're making now is not addressing the problems with our children, our babies. And it is trickling over to the total society. When the heinous act on Lyle Avenue, I believe, where a man lost his life because two children, allegedly 14 and 16, decided to douse this man with a flammable liquid and burned him basically alive. How disturbing and how heinous is that? We sit back in our homes and our offices, our churches, and we go, wow, that's bad, that's terrible. But we're becoming desensitized, and we cannot. So we have to come out of our homes. We have to come out of our schools. We have to come out of our offices. And above all, we have to come out of our churches, because we have to change the hearts and the minds of these young people. Because if we don't, we're going to lose not only our community, but we're going to lose our country, because we cannot continue to go this way. So I want to thank Chief Van Roderl for inviting me to have this time. President Van White, a few other pastors are here. Steve Brew, Majority Leader of the County Legislature. He's also within our organization. The mayor, I've talked to Mayor Warren on a number of occasions, including this weekend. She supports us fully. She understands the significance. And we're going to be addressing this together. Talk to some county officials. They're with us. So it's time to make a difference in a very significant approach. We will not take this anymore. We cannot take this again anymore as a community. And we have to come together. You got to come out of your offices. You got to come out of your homes. You got to come out of your churches. And we got to do this together. So again, together we can when we take a stand. That's all I have to say. Thanks, Chief.
Real quick, I just want to acknowledge those 4 investigators that came in and stayed in the back of the room here that worked on this case. And I tell you, these guys worked tirelessly, and I'm so proud of all the work that you guys did, and thank you for all that you did. We're going to switch gears at this point, right? And we're going to speak now as an association of chiefs of police. We also have some sheriffs, obviously, here. It doesn't matter which patch we're wearing. I think there's some common changes or reforms that I think we all agree that need to be made. Law enforcement is part of the solution here, right? One of the different prongs, approaches, strategies. There will always have to be some sort of law enforcement to keep the bad guys in line. So with that, as you know, there's been multiple reforms that have been made to different systems within the criminal justice systems in the last 3 years. We've had bail reform, parole reform, and raise the age, right? And with those reforms, which I think we all agree we'd love to see some changes, it's all about changing behavior. We'd love to save the kids. We don't want to see people end up with murders or stuff like that. We would love to help these people, and we do agree changes have been made. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of unintended consequences that came with these changes that have contributed to what we're seeing today. We have a proliferation of guns on the street, right? In the past 2 weeks, the Gates Police have recovered 4 loaded guns, handguns. We've arrested 8 people with weapons charges after conducting those high-profile patrols down on the Buell Road corridor since the homicide down there. We have youth, unfortunately, that are idolizing violence, weapons, cash, cars, and in fact, they'll even make a video for you, and they'll show you what they're thinking that we've all seen on Facebook, right? We had a car chase in the city a couple weeks ago. I can't remember. I think it was a carjacking, right? It was a car full of teenagers, and they actually Facebooked it live. I think most of us all saw it. That feed was sent all over Monroe County. They actually Facebook Live, right? Being chased by the police and the lights and the siren in the background. That is what we're dealing with. This is a problem. This is a huge problem of how do we change that. And it starts with each individual, right? This is a people problem. I can't change that. But we do have to have enforcement strategies to at least assist them or get them off the streets if we can't change them. The criminal justice system has been watered down with new reforms that promote this out-of-custody policy and or early release. Now this sounds great on the surface, but it doesn't always work in reality to keep everybody out of custody and to do early release. This inability, in some cases, the unwillingness of certain judges to set bail and hold somebody in custody is crushing our efforts to keep neighborhoods safe. The streets have become a free-for-all with no accountability. I gotta be honest with you, I got 36 years on the job. It's the Wild West out there. How many of the press releases that come out of these agencies start with the person was on fill in the blank, parole, the person was on probation, the person's a predicate felon, the person was free on bail reform. Therein lies the problem. Therein lies what we have to get changed. It all comes from Albany. There must be a public safety carve-out in the bail reform law that gives the court the ability to hold the most dangerous felons in custody before trial. Before this law was passed, I can say that as the Chiefs Association, we held meetings with our Rochester Albany delegates, we held press conferences expressing our grave concerns of the potential lawlessness and violence that this would create. Our prediction has arrived. That is what we are now experiencing. So what are some of the reformed systems? Let's start with the parole system, and let's see how that is going. The philosophy of parole has shifted from something that you earned, and it was a reward to let you out before your maximum sentence expired. It's now become, in many cases, a legislative right that you have, right? There's no more choice. They must release you after a certain amount of time. That this whole concept of parole has changed. The idea of when you do get released to supervise you and to set the rules that you must follow, and if you violate the rules, you get violated and you get sent back to state prison. It had some punch to it, right? That was kind of taken away in the philosophy of re-engaging the parolee. And it sounds good, and I agree if it worked a lot, this is a great concept, but unfortunately this re-engaging is not really working. Some of these people are just bad apples, and the only way we're going to stay safe is if they're in custody. That is not happening. In fact, parole has kind of become the dumping grounds, right? If you look at what New York has done the last 8 to 10 years, we've closed 17 prisons, right? 3 more are scheduled to be closed in 2021. Well, how do you think we do this, right? How do we reduce the prison size, right? We dump everybody out. We put them on parole long before a lot of times they've served their maximum sentence. And again, we're not against parole, the system, but there's got to be some sort of reasonableness on who we're letting out, right? We can't let out the people that are going to destroy our community. And that's the problem we're having, is the ones that are getting out are the same ones that are going to attack our loved ones. And I'll give you some numbers here, okay? So in Rochester, we have just under 2,000 parolees, okay, that are out in Rochester living in our area right now. On any given day, there's 30 or 40 of them that are absconded, right? We have no idea where they've gone. They've cut their ankle bracelets, they've taken off, and we have task force that go out there and try to find these guys that have just taken off. There's 30 to 40 of them. We have no clue where they are. And that's on every day here in our city of Rochester. Since 2019, 6 parolees have been killed in the city of Rochester. So in reality, I guess parole for them became a death sentence, right? 6 of them were victims of murders. 7 of them in the last 2 years have been charged with murder. 7 parolees were let out, and then they went out to reoffend. Now they've committed an A1 felony, and they're back in the system, and we have a citizen, you know, who paid the price for this. The parole system, again, if it went back to the way it was set up, you've got to have some bite in the parole system. It should be a privilege to be out on parole, and if you violate that privilege, you should have to go back and serve some time. The parolees are kind of running the street right now. Let's talk about some real quick juvenile justice, and then I'm going to get out of the way here. Raise the age, okay? That became big in 2017. 16 to 17-year-olds, right? We want to treat them as juveniles. Instead of sending them to the adult court, we don't want to send them to the Department of Corrections. We want to have these wraparound services, right? So we can change them so they don't make poor decisions, and we don't want to put them in prison. It's the last thing we were trying to do. That was the philosophy of that, giving them services, wraparound help, so they could change the course that they were on. I think the court's role, really, when they talked about this, was to take on this nurturing role, right? The court would be kind of guardianship and supervision, not so much punitive, but to become the guardian and provide that supervision, that whole role of nurturing, right? The court, imagine the court trying to nurture them. That was the whole thought of this thing. Now, as a Chiefs Association, back in 2017, we opposed it, okay? We opposed raise the age, not because we don't want that, but we also knew, based on past promises that come out of Albany, we knew that this was going to end up being a bait and switch, okay? Yes, we're going to keep them out of court, but we also knew from past experiences the services aren't coming, right? The